Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Karen Dean is a personification of resilience, and her book, We Are Unbreakable, celebrates the resilience of her neighbors in Nova Scotia. The book is a compendium of raw, real stories from 2020. Please welcome Karen Dean to Bump in the Road. Welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. As the intro said, my name's Karen Dean. I live in a little rural town on the east coast of Canada, in Nova Scotia. And my kind of theme for my life is that I'm unbreakable, and that for my kids as well. So I'm a single mom. I have been for 11 years, but our story really started back in 1996. I got married and had two wonderful children. And my son, when he was 8 weeks old, I was told he would probably never be able to walk or talk because he was born with a permanent brain injury. We went through a lot. He does walk and talk. He's as normal as boys get. That marriage turned into an abusive marriage. I left that marriage, quickly jumped into another marriage, which I should never have done. Had another baby, and we had a really rocky breakup. That is a story for another day because we could talk for hours about that. But following the divorce, my daughter actually had her lung collapse at school one day. And then a year later, when she was 15, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Fast forward to 2020, the year that affected so many people in so many ways because of the COVID pandemic. But in the end of June of that year, my son, the one who was never supposed to walk or talk, was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. And that all of that put together has brought me to publishing a book that became a Canadian bestseller while my son was being treated for cancer. And that's the really short version of our story. But I call myself a resilience expert because we have been through so much, me and my children as a family, and I think that I'm a self-made resilience expert. It's not from studying books. It's not from taking courses. It's from living it and from parenting 3 children through some of the hardest things you could even imagine. And I'm just really happy to still be here, and my kids are healthy, and I'm helping others realize that they're not alone in their hard times. And that was really the theme of the book that I published in 2020.
You know, we talk a lot about resilience. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, what is resilience? I mean, what are our actions that create resilience?
I call resilience our ability to bounce back when life tries to knock us down. And I say the more you do that with the little things, the easier it is with the big things. So it's that belief in ourselves that we can handle the hard things. So, say you have a little tiny hard thing. My daughter at school, if she doesn't do well on a test or she has a disagreement with a friend, we talk about how to make that into something good, how to handle it in a good way and not let it bring you down. And I think instilling that in our kids helps them become more resilient as adults when we face the really hard things. And that's sort of how I got where I am. Is I never believed that I couldn't. I never believed that I couldn't get through the hard thing. So when my son, when the doctors told me that he was probably never going to be able to walk or talk because of his brain injury, I cried, as we all do. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not be okay. But a few days later, I just said, that's not going to be my kid. And then I made sure I got every bit of help I could get for him. And that's what really helped me, was helping him. And I find that that is a real key to healing and being resilient, is trying to help others. Because by helping others, you actually help yourself more than you know. So that has really been a theme for a lot of the things I've done in my life, is how can I use this to help somebody else? And
And as a
that's
part of no, I'm sorry. I'm just, as I listen, I think, is a part of resilience learning to learn.
for sure. And it's that's very much what resilience is learning the lesson from that hard thing, and taking what's happened to you and turning it into a learning opportunity. So whether it's a divorce and you now have to learn to be a single parent, there's a lot to learn when you go from having another parent to help to having no one to help. And it's about learning how you do that the best way possible. It's about reading or watching the experience of others and taking from that. Because no matter what you go through in life, someone else has already been through it. There are very few things you will experience that someone else hasn't already been through. So that's how I always looked at it, is where can I find some resources to help me? Where can I find someone who's already been through this and learn from their experience? And what I do in my work now is taking my experience and helping others with whatever they are going through.
Yeah, I think stories are so powerful. And that leads to the book that you put together, which is a compilation of really interesting stories. If you would give the background for this, because you're in Nova Scotia, correct?
Yes.
It's a fairly small province, is it not, population-wise?
It is. Since COVID, we've actually had a lot of people from other parts of the country move to Nova Scotia because it's such a great place. So our population for the entire province just passed 1 million people. So our whole province is smaller than many cities, and we're spread out over quite a large area. So it's a really tight-knit place, and that's why in COVID, we had another really tragic incident here. We had our first and only mass shooting, which I know in the U.S. sadly is very common, but here in Nova Scotia, it's not. And that was part of the inspiration for my book, because I lost a dear friend in that shooting. But it affected everybody. And I'm sure in the U.S. it does affect everyone as well. But here it was so heavy. It was just, these things don't happen here. So add this scary virus that, on March 13th was when our province kind of shut down. And then this incident happened on April 18th and 19th. So, we're really small, tight knit. It's just like the whole province is like a little town where it feels like everybody knows everybody, and everyone is somehow connected. So it's a really great place to live and to visit. I'll put in my tourism sales pitch here. Not that I benefit from it at all. I don't have a tourist business, but it is a great place.
Now, the quality of life and connection is something that came through really strongly in your book. How did you choose the stories to put into your book?
Well, it's kind of a little funny how the book came about. So with the COVID restrictions, my son was receiving chemotherapy, had a lot of appointments, and I wasn't allowed to go into his treatment with him because with COVID and he was 19, so technically considered an adult here in Nova Scotia. So I was not allowed to go in treatment with him. And we live over an hour away from the treatment center. So I sat in my truck in the parking lot. And one day I got this idea. It was actually 41 days before I published the book. It took me 41 days to do all of this. But I thought, you know what? There's so many powerful stories right now because I'm scrolling social media while I'm sitting in my truck and I'm seeing people's comments about how COVID was affecting our lives. And I just said, these stories need to be shared. I need to do this. I've always wanted to publish a book. This is not the book that I was going to publish 20 years ago. But I just I'm lucky to have a huge network of incredible women. I wanted it to be women's stories because I think COVID really affected women in ways it didn't affect men. So I reached out either by text message, by email, by Facebook message to about 50 people that I knew through different networks in my life. And I said, could you please write me your story of 2020 and can I have it next week? And I wanted to put that pressure on, firstly, because I wanted to get the book published before Christmas. Secondly, because if you give yourself too much time to think about it, you write a different story. So I wanted their real, raw stories right off the top of their heads. And I got the most incredible stories that are really inspiring. And so 21 people got back to me by my deadline. I am the 22nd story. And it was just... it ended up being a diverse group of different age groups and different careers. And I had tried to mix it up as much as possible. The one story I didn't get was from a new mom, because new moms didn't have time to write a story at that point in time. But it really was just serendipitous almost that all of these things, all of these women came together on such short notice to write their stories.
What are some of the stories that stick in your mind? I mean, all of them, obviously, but
Yes.
You must have a few that really come to the forefront.
It's impossible to pick a favorite, of course, but I organized them alphabetically by first name. And the first two are both named Amy, and they're both farm women. And I used to be a farmer as well. And many times when we look at farm women, we call them like the farmer's wife. We don't see them as the person out there doing the work and getting their hands dirty. But these women are out there doing the work, getting their hands dirty. And all of a sudden their kids are home from school. There's no daycares open. And they have these children that it's not safe for them to be out working with these children with them. So what do you do? And these women were actually very instrumental in trying to lobby the province to get some childcare options for women who still have to work. Yes, they work from home, but they work in dangerous settings. So it wasn't like someone who has an office job who can just bring their office home and kind of deal with kids running around her feet if she had to. These women are out on big pieces of machinery and doing work that children couldn't do. So those really resonated with me for sure. One woman who is a principal at the local elementary school actually thanked COVID because she had one child and he was in his final year of high school. And normally he would be out, doing things with his friends after school. And she had this opportunity to spend so much quality time with him because both of them were home because she's a teacher and schools are closed. And she thanked COVID for that opportunity to spend that time with her son before he went out to do the adult things that he would be doing just a few months later. So that was really touching too. Michelle Tessier, she is a naval commander, actually retired now, but she actually talked to other women in the military and got their stories to kind of weave into her own. And the story that built from that was just incredible and so interesting to see that because a lot of us have no idea what these women are going through in the military. And there were some tragic events in the military here in Canada at the time as well. Some deaths, like a helicopter crash off of Greece. So she talked to people who were impacted by that. And it was just a really, really interesting story. Another one, Lisa Drader Murphy, is a fashion designer, but COVID for her, and I saw this in a lot of people, brought back old traumas because we were thrown into this unknown. We had a lot of fear that was, the media was giving us information that was putting fear in us. And she had an eating disorder that she had dealt with many, many years ago. But that voice in her head that that was the eating disorder came back because of the trauma that we were going through with all of the fear of COVID. And she had to sort of bring herself back again to fighting that urge. And it's a really interesting story to see how people's past traumas came back through COVID and the unknowns of it. So again, so many stories. Josie Ryan is the executive director of a long-term care facility, and they were kind of the most deaths from COVID happened there in the first wave of COVID. They had a big outbreak, and we actually didn't have that many deaths from COVID in the beginning. We were praised internationally, actually, for our ability to keep our numbers really low. But there were a lot in her facility. So she talked about what it was like to be a leader in that facility and try to keep her staff motivated, try to keep herself motivated while dealing with all of this loss and the fear and the residents that couldn't have their family visit them. So, just a lot of them really stirred your emotions for sure. Margaret Miller, she got to spend a lot of time with her husband. He was really sick through COVID, and their roles were reversed, where he was always the one looking after her and she became the one looking after him. So it was a lot about being together, and I forget how many years they've been married, but a lot of years, and raised children, and a little chronicle of how it was affecting their lives now. So really so many interesting stories. There's a couple of immigrant women who talked about, one of them, their dad died back in her home country of Nigeria, and she couldn't go back to mourn his loss and celebrate his life because of the travel restrictions. So it's just such a huge range of things. But at the same time, all of the stories kind of have a similar theme in that this is really hard, but life is still really good. And they found the best parts of it. And that was what really inspired me, was the people who found the good in such a hard situation.
How did this change the relationships within your community?
This book actually brought so many people together that wouldn't normally know each other, and brought those, like, none of these people are professional writers. So that was one part of it. But beyond the book, COVID really showed how strong Nova Scotians are. And in addition to that, like I talked about the mass shooting happening within COVID, we had this Nova Scotia Strong kind of became our new theme phrase. And still now you see vehicles with bumper stickers that say Nova Scotia Strong. I actually have another business, which is a clothing company, and I did a Nova Scotia Strong logo and sold it on T-shirts and hoodies, and raised $96,000 for the families of the victims. And people are still wearing those shirts with Nova Scotia Strong, and there were other people that designed other designs as well. And I think it really showed us who live here, but the bigger country and internationally, what a strong community spirit there is here, and how neighbors helped neighbors, and how everyone came together to help each other. And, our premier, when a lot of people were kind of breaking the rules and going out, he coined a phrase, "Stay the blazes home." And that's still a meme. That's still something people say all the time. It became T-shirts. It became, posts on the internet all the time of "Stay the blazes home." So there are just so many things that brought us together through this. And that's what I like to focus on. There's a lot of people who focus on, the hard parts of it. But I like to focus on how it really brought people together. It had neighbors checking on neighbors. It had people saying, "I'm going to the grocery store today. Can I pick anything up for you?" And just a lot of really things that, probably happened 100 years ago when our communities were really small and you had to rely on your neighbors. But we don't do that as much anymore. And I think it really came back a lot through COVID.
One of the things, I'm going to go back to the shooting because a lot of people in the U.S. probably aren't familiar with it. And it was one gentleman that went on an absolute rampage from neighbor to neighbor to neighbor within a fairly small area and shot, was it 25 people?
There were 22 victims plus one woman was pregnant. So we consider that our 23rd victim. But he started in his close neighborhood, which was a very small community, and shot neighbors and burned their houses down. And the police thought he must be still in that area, but he went in hiding overnight. And then the next morning started driving around, going to more houses. He drove a very large area of the province. I forget how many miles it was, but hours of driving around, going to different people's houses, shooting them, and a lot of the times burning their houses down. The pregnant woman and another woman, he just pulled them over on the side of the road, because the trick, or how he managed to do this, was that he had a car that looked identical to our Royal Canadian Mounted Police cars. The same stickers on the side, the sirens on the roof. He had an RCMP uniform, so he looked like a police officer. So he pulled people over and shot them in their cars. He drove in people's driveways and they thought he was the police. So it's really disturbing, and we'll never really know what triggered any of it, because the police ended up shooting him before he could get to anybody else. But in that amount of time, he had gone to a lot of people's houses, shot innocent bystanders. I know of 4 of the victims, and one guy there were a police officer tried to stop him. The 2 cars collided and he lit them on fire. And this gentleman stopped to help, and he threw him in the trunk of one of the police cars and stole his vehicle. So in that time frame, he drove 3 different vehicles, and he did change his clothes to look a little different. And what the RCMP said afterwards was, it's really hard to hunt somebody down who looks just like you, because they're having other police officers come from other areas of the province to try to find this guy, but none of these people know each other. So when they're meeting him on the road, they didn't know if it was one of their own or him. And it was really hard. And it started as a domestic dispute with him and his partner. So it triggered a lot of feelings for people like me who have survived domestic violence. It really was hard for our whole province, because just about everybody in Nova Scotia had some connection to one of the victims, it seemed. Because, like I said, we're a small community. That's 22 people plus a baby. And since then, there's actually been another man commit suicide because of the effects that this tragedy had on him. So we call it 24 victims now. And it still affects people. The trauma of that experience didn't go away quickly and will never go away for a lot of people. So it's been really hard. And I empathize with anyone who has dealt with that type of a situation before. But this was totally unprecedented in that most of them, someone walks in a building, shoots people, and that's the end of it. But this person burned several buildings, drove several miles, and nobody knew where he was at some points in time. So it was really, really difficult to deal with.
And there's no connection between the victims. So there's no way to even try to predict what's going to happen.
No. And, a lot of people didn't even know it was happening, because there wasn't a big police announcement, because they thought they had him contained in an area, is how I understand it. But he actually wasn't there. But it was dark. And this is a tiny community that doesn't even have street lights. This is, a very rural, remote community with not many people that live there. And most of the police that were there were not familiar with the area. So it was really difficult for them to do anything at night in the dark. And then when daybreak came, he was, 20 miles away from where they thought he was, and burnt another house down.
I think whenever any of these things happen, we all say, how can this happen here?
Yeah, and we did, and we still do. And it was actually the largest mass shooting in Canadian history, which is sad. We did not want that title here in Nova Scotia.
On the other side of the spectrum, one of the themes that comes out of your book is talking about self care and self love, which
Mm-hmm.
I think during difficult times becomes incredibly important. And it's kind of a catch all phrase, if you will, but I think it's very deep and really important.
I agree. And I think it's really it's necessary to be able to love yourself through all the hard times, even, less hard than dealing with a mass shooting. But I think that's where the strength comes from. And I have to say, in my early days, I didn't love myself in ways, but in other ways I did, because like I said earlier, I always believed that I could be a good mom to my kids. I always believed that I could get my kids through the hard times. I didn't have a lot of faith in myself in other areas, but somehow I knew that I was meant to be these kids' parent and get them through these things. So I think we have to believe in ourselves that we can get through it and that life can go on. And I know with that sort of a tragedy, it takes a while to get to that point. And I think the families of the victims, many of them are still working on that, because until we're forced to do it, sometimes we never think about self-love. We never think about how we would handle that situation because we don't think it's ever going to happen to us.
No, I think that's very true. And I think that through the stories of your book, there are just some incredible themes that come out of it all. What do you see as some of the most powerful?
I think the most powerful message from the whole book is that you are not alone. And I know in such hard times, we often feel alone, and I have many times. But the stories in that book, I can't see how there is a person anywhere that lives in any community and anywhere in the world of any age group that will not relate to at least one of those stories. Because we all, as different as we are, we all have a lot in common. And I think that was really the most powerful part of that book for me, was that we are not alone, and that other people have been through it and we can learn from their experience.
If you could choose two or three things to learn from the experience, what would they be?
The experience of the book or the experience of the whole thing?
The whole thing. I mean, the book is partly a reflection of that time capsule, if you will, in Nova Scotia, which just had so many difficult elements going on all at once.
I think some of the important things that I've gotten out of it is to focus on the good, because even though that was a horrible experience and we lost some amazing people, it did bring us all together. And there's a lot to be learned from what happened. There's a lot of learning experiences, how it was handled by the police, but there's also a lot of learning to be done on how someone got to the point where they would do such a thing. So although he's not here to try to analyze his brain, I think we really have to look at our mental health system and find help for the people who need it, and make it okay for people to talk about it. There's such a stigma around admitting that you are mentally ill. When my son had cancer, nobody thought anything bad about him. But if I had posted on all those days when I did a social media post and said, I'm sitting in the parking lot of the hospital and my son is getting chemotherapy, I got a lot of really sympathetic and empathetic responses. If I had said, I'm sitting in the parking lot because my son is seeing a psychiatrist, I wouldn't have got the same responses. And I think it's so important to recognize that it is okay to not be okay. And it is okay to ask for help. And I think it's important for our governments and our healthcare systems to provide that help and to make it easier to access. And that is a global issue, I think. Definitely a countrywide issue here in Canada, where mental health resources are hard to get. And I think we need to make that a lot easier. So I think that is a really big thing. And through COVID and through that shooting, it's really shone a light on how a lot of people aren't that well mentally, and that we need to give them help. And we need to help them from a young age. And that's one thing I've tried to instill in my own children is it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to ask me for help. And it's okay to say, I need your help. And I'm not feeling okay, or I'm finding this situation very hard. And that's when you find the resources to help, whether it is reading a good book with stories or with tools to help. What I've really found to help myself and my kids, and what I encourage people I work with to do, is to set clear boundaries on who you spend your time with. And that includes online. And I think especially online. If the posts you are seeing are not bringing something positive to you, stop following that person. And I think that helps a lot with how we see our lives and how we see people around us. And it's been said for years that we are the combination of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And that includes the people the content that you absorb online, or the shows that you watch on television or Netflix or whatever. You really need to focus on people, places, content that brings good feelings to you, and try to get away from the ones who bring you down. And it's really hard. Sometimes they're family members, but you have to set that boundary and spend your time with people who light you up, who make you feel good, who give you good energy. And I think that would change a lot in this world if everybody lived by that.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you on that. And I think it's okay too to let people go sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
because we all evolve, we all go different ways. And sometimes a friendship can remain in place, but it may not be as important.
Yes. And it's okay to put a little distance between you and whoever that may be. Like I said, even if it's a family member, I get really frustrated when I see posts like, oh, but that's your mother. Oh, but that's your sister. That's your brother. It doesn't matter. If that person is not providing something positive to your life, then you have to distance yourself. And whether they're blood or not, it's just, you're the only one who's going to look after you at the end of the day. So make sure you are looking after you, and that will give you the strength and the energy to look after the other people that you're responsible for. For instance, if you're a parent.
No, I think making our mental health priority one is so important. It's like, being on the airplane with the oxygen mask. That's the perfect
Yes,
analogy. If you don't take care of yourself first, you can't help the person next to you.
exactly. And that applies in everyday life, not just on your airplane.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I don't think it's selfish. It's not narcissistic. It is just plain good sense. And it
Yeah.
has so many positive ramifications for everyone around you.
It does. And a lot of people look at this self-care movement as being selfish, but it's not. It's necessary. You really can't pour from an empty cup. And so I think it's super important to look after yourself first, and then you will be able to look after everyone else a lot better.
I almost hesitate to ask you this next question because of what you went through personally during this period. I often ask people, would you rewrite your story? And to ask a mother that when her son is going through chemo is just awful. But I'm going to ask because I suspect that there's a lot of strength and a lot of lessons that came out from out of that really difficult situation.
For sure. And I don't think I would rewrite my story. I do say I've been married twice, and I call them my first mistake and my second mistake, but they weren't really mistakes because I learned a lot from both of those situations. And I want to go back to when my son was a toddler, and he was delayed in everything because of this brain injury that he was born with. And his favorite word when he was in physiotherapy and occupational therapy, his favorite phrase, I should say, was, I can't, or just it started as can't. And I used to say to him, There's no such thing as I can't. There's only I don't want to. And he took that, I truly believe, I don't know if he knows it consciously or not, but, fast forward to when he was diagnosed with cancer, he handled it like a champion, because I think he still had that in his head, that voice from what I said when he was a toddler is, there's no such thing as I can't. And I've heard a lot of horror stories of people going through cancer treatment and how sick they've gotten and how hard it was. And of course, he, not being an adult out on his own, he basically had to go to treatment and come home and rest. And I did the rest for him. I cooked meals and did everything. But he had 6 rounds of chemotherapy and he only vomited 3 times. And besides losing his hair and being tired, that was the only side effect he had. And he had 25 rounds of radiation, which they said to prepare for burnt skin. They treated his whole chest. So they said, you're probably going to have burns, you're going to have throat issues, you're going to have lung issues, you probably will develop a cough. There was a huge list of side effects to expect. And he had nothing. 25 rounds of radiation. Besides being tired, his skin did not even turn red. He never had a sore throat. And I just think that we mentally have such an ability to control what happens to us. And I think the attitude that he approached it with, which was, get this out of me so I can go back to work, I think that was really what made it so easy for him. And it wasn't easy by any stretch, but it was far easier than for so many other people. And I don't know if I'm right or not, but I credit the fact that he had that mindset going into it. That was such a help for him.
I think that mindset of watching your thoughts, that you can do things, of looking on the positive side, not to be a Pollyanna, but, I think that looking towards possibility rather than, issues that may or may not ever arise,
right,
is really important in terms of directing your thinking. And that all goes back to mental health. I mean, we've come full circle on the conversation. Yes. And we all have control of it. We do. And our mental health is something we absolutely can control. And I know everyone has a different story. But at the end of the day, we can't put ourselves in that victim mindset. And, that's where he started when he was just a toddler of, I can't do this. And I'm like, you absolutely can do this. And if they look at a CT scan or an MRI of his brain today, they still think, if they had not seen him and just saw the pictures, they would think he is still in a wheelchair, or he never was in a wheelchair, but they would think that he is in a wheelchair and completely dependent on somebody to care for him. And I've had doctors look at me and look at him and think they're the wrong pictures. And I'm like, no, like his brain kind of worked with what wasn't there. He has not parts missing, but he has way less white matter than he should have in his brain. And that area is filled with fluid. His corpus callosum is so thin that you cannot even see it in some of the images. And that's the part of your brain that sends messages from your right brain to your left brain. But it's been able to make new pathways and work with what it had. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, is to work with what we have, to not compare ourselves to somebody else, because you can't compare your today to somebody that's been doing something for 10 years. And I find that's a comparison many of us make. We want to be that successful person or whatever, the skinny person, we just have so many messages coming at us all the time. But work with what you have today. And I tell my kids, you don't have to be like anybody else. You just have to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. You're only competing with yourself. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.